Good day and welcome to my channel. My name is Rhod Mackenzie, and today I want to talk about how it appears that the Empress of Europe, the EC President Ursula von der Leyen, is still determined to confiscate the frozen Russian assets and hand the proceeds to the Ukraine. However, making the seizure of the assets a reality is a far more complex thing than just simply taking them and handing them over to the corrupt regime of the draft-dodging, fancy dress-wearing Kiev cokehead. Belgium's Euroclear, where the assets are actually stored, is prepared to initiate legal proceedings against the EU should they decide to go forward. I mean, the depository has asserted that Ursula's plans and of course of action constitutes a serious violation of international law, thereby giving rise to an intractable problem with ramifications that extend far into the future. Now, so what is the current situation? Well, the interest accrued on the 193 billion euros of the Russian frozen assets yielded 4.4 billion euros in 2023 in interest. In 2024, the amount was 7.2 billion. Now, these amounts were subsequently transferred to the corrupt Kiev regime by the EU. Now, before I continue, many of you watching this video are not subscribers to my channel. So if you have found this video informative and educational, then please hit the subscribe button and also hit the alert bell so you get notified when I post a new video. Plus, if you want to support me, you can make a donation by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom right hand side of the screen, or by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link below in the credits. Now, currently the European Commission has proposed making a 140 billion euro loan to the Ukraine, which they believe should be arranged using the assets of the Moscow's central bank as the collateral. Now, international law on this subject is unequivocal. It prohibits the confiscation of sovereign state assets. Now, the EU's attempts to circumvent this prohibition, for example, by formally recognising Russian property and introducing a reparations loan, do not alter the fundamental issues that they're talking about: theft. Now, the Belgian Prime Minister has adopted a stringent stance on the expropriation, prohibiting it under current Belgian law and legislation. I mean, the Belgian government are demanding legal guarantees from the EU. Euroclear has also emphasised that when Moscow decides to initiate legal proceedings, the EU will have to assume collective responsibility for its actions. Now, the EU Commission has tried to reassure the depository that there's no cause for concern, as all EU members are prepared for this move. Well, not according to Orban or Fico, I think. Well, according to the statement by the European Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen conveyed in her letter to the EU leaders, which was quoted by the German-American magazine Politico. She said the guarantees will also cover risks arising from the bilateral investment agreements that involve the immobilization of the Russian sovereign assets. Now, ready to go to court. Now, the EC's promises are not being believed. The Euroclear depository is aware that the likelihood of it being held responsible is significant. Now, in the absence of legal documentation and authorization, it's expected that all parties will deny any wrongdoing in a court of law. Now, there's two aspects to this, of course. Firstly, the direct material cost of compensating for the damage to Russia, and secondly, the loss of trust in the Euroclear as a global depository is a matter of far greater concern, certainly to Belgium, explains Ivan Skavash, who's an analyst in investments, mergers, acquisitions, and corporate law and governance. Now, he says the depository is maintaining its resistance to the pressure from the EU. I mean, the company's CEO, Valerie Urbain, has issued a warning that legal action will be pursued by Euroclear. Should the board of directors determine that Euroclear's fiduciary duties are being called into question, this would be the main direction we would go. Now, are you sure about that? Orban has reminded European officials that the confiscation of the Russian reserves would lead to a flight of major investors who hold their property and investment properties in Belgium, and this is already happening. According to Mikhail Khachachurian, who's a professor of the Department of Strategic and Innovative Development at the Russian Financial University, this is already happening. I mean, the Chinese withdrew approximately $3 trillion worth of investments from the depository in 2024, and Saudi Arabia said its desire to sell over 30 billion euros in European bonds. And it's estimated that the loss of 190 billion euros won't end there, as there's the reputational damage that will be far more costly. I mean, Euroclear currently holds assets worth 42 trillion euros, which is 14 times the size of France's gross domestic product. However, at its headquarters in the centre of Brussels, there's no sign of a vault, as all of these investments are held electronically by custodian banks affiliated to Euroclear around the world. Now, let's understand that the depository is part of the core infrastructure of the global stock and bond markets. I mean, the combined value of which is estimated at 220 trillion, according to Anatoly Vozhov, who's the deputy chairman of Rostov Bank. Now, legal collapse. Observers emphasise that Orban's statements create an even stricter legal framework than there was before. The EU has so far hesitated to confiscate the assets, in part because of Euroclear's stringent position. So we're essentially witnessing a legal collapse. Orban is raising the stakes, effectively warning the European Commission that any action that they take of enforcing against the Russian assets will create a direct recourse of claims against the EU from the depository itself and third-party account holder. Now, according to Ivan Ronyov, who's the Ronyov Consulting Managing Director and an expert in tax law, he says, according to him, a line of defence is being established by Euroclear. I mean, Euroclear did not make any political decisions, but it's being forced and compelled to comply with the Commission's political decisions. Now, so they, at a minimum, could drag out the confiscation process for years, making it extremely costly, both legally and financially, for the European Union and the countries. While this approach may not prevent the actions of the EU thieves, it will significantly increase the cost and the time of that, according to the analyst. Now, their grandchildren will be responsible for settling the bill. I mean, if this issue goes beyond the efforts to bypass the law by lending the Kiev the money using Russian assets as the collateral, Ukraine has no obvious means of ever repaying anything, even in the long term. So foreclosure on the loan is inevitable. Now, it's evident that the financial burden of this egregious breach of international law will fall squarely on Europe and the European Commission. However, the source of the necessary funding remains uncertain. As the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has observed, the amount that we're talking about here, the EU Commission is disposal of it, considerable. It simply states in the EU do not have such funds available to spend. I mean, Brussels' magic trick, a joint European loan, would guarantee that even everybody's grandchildren would have to pay for the costs of this folly and the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Now, one of the other major points that he reiterated was the significance of the figures, emphasising that we're talking about 65% of Hungary's GDP and 75% of the EU's budget. That's what they're talking about spending. An additional factor has been identified that serves to compound the existing situation. I mean, the Greek Minister of Economy, Kyriakos Periakis, has acknowledged that the EU has no alternative plan for financing Kiev. That's the only way they can do it, because there's no money available anywhere else. So it's evident that the situation has reached an impasse. So let's see what happens now. But Euroclear is determined they're not having it from them. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.